Hi, everyone. Welcome to the last chapter, chapter 12. All right. Race, gender, clan, and class. This is the Gorilla Girls, Do Women Have to Be Naked to Get into the Met Museum, 1986 street poster. All persons are born with race and gender characteristics, class, standing, and genealogy that will affect their lives. These characteristics contribute to personal identity, but on the downside, they may also trigger prejudice and discrimination. Art reflects these issues. This is Marc Chagall over Viptis. After a painting from 1914, Russia, France. This is oil on canvas. Some artworks help to form a cohesive identity for a racial group. Others challenge negative attitudes. Often art examines the history or values of a certain ethnic group. At the turn of the 19th century, Russian Jews were considered outsiders, and Jews were allowed to live only in certain areas, restricted from attending universities, and subject to anti-Semitic terrorism. The solitary figure floats over the village and represents thousands of Eastern European Jewish refugees who fled to Russia during World War I. Chagall incorporated Jewish folk tales, celebrations, suffering, and persecution in his painting. Marc Chagall, a Jewish artist, grew up in Russia. His paintings imaginatively recreate Jewish village life at the turn of the century in Russia. Chagall's imagery is personal, a reordering of his experience, and based on folk tales, festivals, marriages, funeral practices, suffering, and death caused by anti-Semitism. In Over Vitebsk, Chagall paints a figure floating over a village. The figure represents thousands of Eastern European Jewish refugees who fled to Russia. A sense of being rootless pervades the picture. The foreground space appears fractured. Chagall used cubism to represent instability and the strong colors of fauvism for greater power and expression. Chagall's painting recreates and memorializes the experiences of Jewish people in Russia at the end of the 19th century. James Van Der Zee, Society Ladies, 1927, black and white photo. The portraits of James Van Der Zee are a record of the Harlem Renaissance. His subjects were intellectuals, merchants, writers, who demanded full participation in U.S. culture and politics. Furniture and trappings of comfort surround his well-dressed sitters. Their poses convey confidence, humor, directness, wistfulness. Van Der Zee was influenced by movies and encouraged sitters to take poses from the films. He also provided costumes and props that allowed his sitters to express their personalities. Art can promote the status and create a positive perception of a racial group. In this case, the portraits show the confident, affluent people of the Harlem Renaissance in the U.S. Compare the Aunt Jemima figure on the right with Van Der Zee's portrait on the left. Betty Saar. I believe there's a question on the quiz about this piece. So it's called The Liberation of Aunt Jemima, 1972. In the 60s, Saar began collecting images of Aunt Jemima, Uncle Tom, Little Black Sambo, and other stereotyped African-American figures from folklore and advertising. She incorporated them into collages and assemblages, transforming them into provocative statements of political and social protest. Unflattering images of African Americans have been common in popular culture over the past 150 years. The Pickaninny, Little Black Sambo, Uncle Tom, and Aunt Jemima. Aunt Jemima depicts a domestic servant, aunt, who was a commonly used term in subordination of African American domestic servants. This work illustrates and protests the ways African Americans were often depicted in folk art and in commercial imagery. Betty Saar uses three versions of Aunt Jemima to question such images. The oldest version is a small image at the center. Cartoon Jemima holds a crying child on her hip. Jemima is a caricature. The middle Jemima is the largest figure, which is most emphasized with bright clothing and black skin. Modern version in the background is thinner, lighter skin, and more attractive, if less black. James Luna. I believe there's another question on the quiz about James Luna. The artifact piece. I love James Luna. I studied him when I went to community college in San Diego. He's a big artist in San Diego, dealing with Native American art and protest art, really. In the artifact piece, Native American James Luna challenged the way contemporary American culture and museums have presented his race as extinct and vanished. Luna posed himself dressed only in a leather cloth. Various personal items were displayed in a glass case. Luna challenged the viewer to reconsider what museums teach about cultures and what is a cultural artifact. Luna considers himself a warrior, using art and the legal system to fight for Native Americans. The purpose of art is often to make simple stereotypes more nuanced and accurate. Luna's work is intended to debunk a simplistic image of Native Americans. In the U.S., hundreds of images are produced that deal with other cultures. We develop ideas about foreign and ethnic groups from mass media images we consume. The position of the viewer is privileged, consuming images of other people without interacting with them. In Nam June Paik's Buddha Duchamp Buoys, 1989, video installation with Buddha sculpture as seen at the September 2010 exhibition at the Kunstpalast Museum in Dusseldorf. Buddha Duchamp Buoys, Nam June Paik takes on the gaze in relation to East and West. The title, Buddha Statue, and the television reference various parts of the world and the consumption of culture through media without direct contact. Paik turns around cultural dominance and replaces it with the potentially confusing but also open playing field of cultures meeting cultures. This is painting from a cult house, Papua New Guinea, 20th century. Palm leaves on a bamboo frame, painted with earth pigments. Every culture defines acceptable behavior for women and men. Artwork gives us clues about social restrictions and often plays a part in making them. In the early 20th century, before foreign influences, men dominated women among the Sepik people of the Papua New Guinea. Art and rituals reinforced and dramatized this relationship. The tambourine rituals took place in decorated cult houses. Men saw the rituals as creating men from infants, usurping women's procreative power. Many South Pacific peoples believed a person's being was built through a lifetime of ritual experiences. The paintings and carvings were created in order to pass power on to younger men. Peter Paul Rubens, Abduction of the Daughters of Lysippus, 1617. Gender roles are often revealed in art and reflected in architecture and fashion. In The Abduction of the Daughters by Lysippus, Rubens depicts what was considered masculine and feminine during that era. The figures represent ideal body types. The women's bodies voluptuous, soft, fleshy, and occupy domestic interiors. These qualities were considered sexually attractive and a sign of health and wealth. The men, darker skinned, muscular, occupy the outdoors. The painting also represents gender behavior. Men have privilege over women's bodies. Expressions are subdued and determined. Western art history has many examples of the female nude providing pleasure for male viewers and legitimized because it was art. Women are learned to be helpless. They are relied on social structures to protect their virtue. They're more emotional. They're unclothed and displayed. In Jacques-Louis David's Oath of the Hierarchy in France, 1784, oil on canvas. In the Oath of Hierarchy, Jacques-Louis David represents a scene from the history of ancient Rome. Heroic actions are a mark of masculinity and reinforced by the women's passivity. In a moment of male bonding, the three brothers become a single force. Some of the gender indicators are male attire or angular lines, female attire or soft curves. Men hold weapons, women are concerned with children. The images reflect the reality of gender roles and create that reality. They spring from existing social conditions, but they also reinforce those conditions. Another indicator of masculinity is the use of classical architecture, popular during the French Revolutionary era. The use of classical elements in art and architecture at this time formed a style called neoclassicism, a revival of Greek and Roman aesthetics. This painting illustrates an event from Roman history. It shows the kinds of behavior that reflected femininity and masculinity in 18th century France. What makes one style masculine and one feminine? The architecture of the Hierarchy was considered manly, while the Hall of Mirrors was considered feminine and elegant. Nothing inherent in these styles requires them to be understood in this way. In another situation, the Harati might be seen as bare and oppressive, and the Hall of Mirrors seen as uplifting and imaginative. This is Rococo. It's a time period, it's an architecture, an art period. Everything was really lavish. Rococo elements, walls and ceilings dissolve in curves. Curves dissolve under nature-based decoration. Reflecting mirrors, crystals, silver, ceiling appears as open sky, birds flying from branch to branch. Critiquing gender roles. Gender roles are accepted and seen natural within a culture, but when there are political or social changes, the roles can become controversial. People change their bodies to enhance their femininity or masculinity by dieting, plastic surgery, implants, scarification, bindings that mold body parts. Hung Lu, I believe this is on the quiz. Hung Lu's painting addresses her Chinese heritage. Much of her work is based on historic photographs, mediated images. Her pictures, often done in series, combine traditional Chinese imagery with personal identity. In this particular, she examines the practice of foot binding. I believe that's a question on the quiz. So this is a picture of foot binding. In dealing with many Chinese women's feet were bound from birth, distorting them into small, twisted fists that were sexually attractive to men. Bound feet ensured that women remained subservient. 1989. Lu ties oppressive gender practices to broader political expression. In Trauma, that's the name of this piece, the woman publicly shows her bound feet, erotic and private. Public exposure was shameful. Below, a dead Chinese student killed by the Chinese government in Tiananmen Square. Lu sees the killings in Tiananmen Square as a shameful event for China. The Guerrilla Girls, a collective of anonymous women artists and artist professionals, protest the fewer exhibitions, jobs, and lower pay for women artists. Guerrilla Girls in masks show up at galleries and museums where women were underrepresented. Their purpose is to cause exposure, embarrassment, and eventually change. Art can point out inequities between genders within a culture. I would say the modern Guerrilla Girls would be Pussy Riot, if you guys know about them. But I love this. The clan. A clan is a group of people joined by blood or marriage ties. The extended family. Art helps solidify extended families by making major ancestors available to the living clan members, by depicting important events in the clan's history, and by acting as an important element in rituals. This is a statue of Tagato Barberini in Rome, 1st century BCE. Ancestors have a major impact on the prestige of the living. Ancient Romans believed their ancestry was tremendously important. They preserved portraits of their ancestors and venerated their memory. At first, ancestors' portraits were death masks made with soft wax. Around the 1st century BCE, affluent Romans had copies of death masks made in marble. The statue of Tagato Barberini is an example of the Roman portrait sculpture made for worship. He is holding portrait busts that boast of his lineage. Portrait heads from Tomb 6 in Oaxaca, Mexico, 640 to 755, stucco. Wow. To the Zapotec people of Mexico, ancestors were so important that the living interred the dead in tombs under their houses and consulted them on problems. By displaying their ancestors' leg bones, rulers ensured their right to rule. In the portrait heads from a tomb in the town of Lambateco in Oaxaca, there are life-size heads sculpted in stucco. They likely represent the founding parents of a clan. Both were important as lineage that was traced through the male and female sides. Ancestors provided legitimacy for rulers in the ancient culture and were consulted on difficult matters. This is Arthur Shaughnessy, Interior House Post, Guilford Island, British Columbia, 1907. Art is instrumental in preserving clan history. The Interior House Post is one of the 4 posts carved for the Raven House of the John Sco clan of the Northwest Coast, Quaquitl. Yeah, I'm terrible. Okay. The Raven House was a lineage house built when a new lineage was founded because of death or marriage. Art is a vehicle for clan cohesion. Sculptures like this were featured in lineage houses and were prominent in ritual feasts when the leaders of the clan changed. Interior house post symbolism is the Thunderbird represents the chief. The curved beak and curved ears suggest supernatural powers. Extra eyes on the wings and torso imply power. And below the Thunderbird is a bear associated with an elder or a high-ranking person. This diagram illustrates the kinds of outlines that are basic to the design of Pacific Northwest art. The form line design in Northwest Coast art, to avoid form, typical U complex with semi-angular curves, a split U with outline after diagrams. Wow. Art used in clan rituals. Clan ties are strengthened through rituals. Art is an essential part of those rituals. The Asmat engage in elaborate rituals to pass on the life force of the deceased clansmen to the rest of the group. Carved poles called bees or beige poles represent deceased clansmen now called ancestors. Large sculptures such as these are associated with rituals that enhance male power and fertility. This is in Papua New Guinea, mid-20th century. Art, ritual, and clan identify are intertwined among the Yoruba people. The Ipa festival is held every other year for 3 days in March to promote fertility and the well-being of the community. The Ipa headdress is called the arangan, which was used in masquerades to honor the family. This is 1974, a photo, a wooden paint. The nuclear family. In industrialized societies, the clan has dwindled to the nuclear family. The relationships between members of a nuclear family are investigated in this sculpture. I love this. This is Marisol the Family, 1962, painted wood and other materials in 3 sections. Marisol's figures are blocks of wood drawn or minimally carved, each maintaining its own separateness while interlocking with the group. The shoes and doors are found objects. The family contrasts with the affluence of the nuclear family as commonly presented in U.S. television in 1962. Compare Marisol's The Family with Sail Baby by Elizabeth Murray. Sail Baby by Elizabeth Murray, which is an abstract painting about family life. 3 rounded canvases suggest the bouncy, energetic bodies of infants or children. Bright colors recall the palette of childhood. This is 1983. Oil on 3 canvases. Almost looks like graffiti. I like it. Baby Makes 3 expands the definition of family. The image created by General Idea presents a homosexual approach to the nuclear family. The work both pokes fun at the idea of the happy nuclear family and shows how gays and lesbians recreate family and social structures. This is in Canada, 1984 to 89. I believe there's a question on the quiz about this. This is the Temple of Ramses II in Egypt. Noticing that they're all men, right? So that would be a patrilineal class. So a group of people sharing the same economic, social, or ruling status compromises a class. Class boundaries are rigid in some cultures. In others, people can easily move up or down the social ladder. Art and class structure can be linked by depicting members of different classes with distinct body styles and poses. By showing the environment, activities that mark members of a certain class, art can be a status item, possession indicating the class of the owner. In ancient Egypt, the body was sculpted in different ways depending on the person's class. Upper classes were depicted in formal, standardized ways that indicated importance in the social hierarchy. The 4 gigantic statues at the Temple of Ramses II at Abu Simbel are examples of official images of the pharaoh. Images of the pharaoh denote his class. Enormous in scale, he is semi-divine. Repetition of the image reinforces his grandeur and divinity. Seated pose is frontal, composed, symmetrical. He has an expressionless face, staring eyes that look outward in timeless serenity. His body is flawless, frozen in idealized youthful prime. Projects of this kind were costly, reinforcing the status of the highest classes. So contrast the seated scribe with the Ramses II. This is a seated scribe in Egypt 5th dynasty, 2500 to 2400 BCE. Painted limestone. Oh, that's in Paris. I've never seen that. The seated scribe was an Egyptian court official. He had a lesser rank than the pharaoh. He was a sculptor. His sculpture is limestone, which is inexpensive, more lifelike, less eternal and permanent, less formality and idealization. Pose is more relaxed and the figure cut away from backing stone. Face is expressive and personalized, not eternally calm and divine. He's intelligent, alert, and aware, and his body shows the effects of age. So the Egyptians were not the only people to create idealized images of their leaders. This is Emperor Justinian and his attendants. Class activities and lifestyles. Art records lifestyles of the rich and famous, but also the lower classes. In many cultures, art is used to define people of high rank. In Europe, portraits were often records of those in high positions. Only the wealthy could afford to commission an oil painting. This painting depicts the family of the Spanish monarch in addition because the painting is a large and costly item. Possessing it is another indicator of status. So this is Velázquez from Spain, Las Meninas, 1656, oil. 10.5 feet by 9 feet, that's big. Las Meninas means maids of honor. At the center is Infanta Margarita in the painter's studio. The Infanta is not painted with a crown, but we understand her exalted position. The location is at the center of the picture. Light floods her with white dress and mark her as the most important figure. Presence of servants is also a sign of rank. The painting is 10.5 feet by 9 feet, a physical object that is large and a sign of rank. Class was also indicated by its members' activities. The swing shows frivolous sexual escapades of the French aristocratic class in the mid-18th century. They enjoyed wealth, privilege, and had few responsibilities. Most of their power had been assimilated by the king, and their duties assumed by the middle class. The aristocracy was transformed into a leisure class. This is Fragonard, The Swing, 1766, right before the Revolution. Rulers in many cultures are often distinguished by crowns and elaborate dress. Dress and other paraphernalia are often a sign of rank. Crowns are worn by high-ranking chiefs. The rank is apparent through dress by the shape of the clothing or headgear, the materials used, and the decorative symbols. This is beadworkers of the Adesina family of the Ifon Alay, braided beaded crown in Nigeria, 20th century. The working class and middle class. In cities, dense populations provide opportunities for commercialization and specialization for merchants, skilled workers, laborers, restaurateurs, tours, entertainers, household workers, and others. This new class was distinct from the nobility and from traditional farm laborers. This is Jan Vermeer van Delft, the kitchen maid. 1660, Vermeer. In The Kitchen Maid, it shows a maid in a modest home in the Netherlands in the 17th century. In this painting, the working class is elevated in dignity. The mundane tasks of pouring milk and arranging bread seem almost sacred. Vermeer often painted ordinary scenes from everyday life, a category of paintings called genre painting. This was part of an overall tendency in the Netherlands of the 17th century to emphasize and elevate middle-class domestic life. Compare The Kitchen Maid with Spring Festival along the river. This is the Zhang Zhejuan Spring Festival along the river, China, late 11th to 12th century, 11th to early 12th century. Palace Museum in Beijing. A painting this size was undoubtedly commissioned. It's 10 feet high, 207 inches long. It was undoubtedly commissioned by a member of the aristocracy, and so this image represents an upper-class concept of ideal middle-class life. The wealth of details, it speaks of the bustle and hard work of the merchant class in China. Ooh, I've seen this. This is actually in, the Art Institute of Chicago. So if you get to Chicago ever, it's here. And it's amazing. It's so big. I was overwhelmed by it's more than life size. This is Seurat Le Grand Jeté, 1884 to 1886. He created pointillism, which those are all dots. It's amazing. It's pixels, but with painting, right? Le Grand Jeté records the increased affluence and leisure of the middle class in Western countries. The painting shows a collection of strangers outdoors on a holiday. Unlike villagers attending a local festival, the groups do not know each other. The figures are proper, composed, and orderly. Details of the middle class dress are carefully recorded. This painting depicts the middle class enjoying increased leisure time in Europe at the end of the 19th century. And it reflects the growing emphasis on and awareness of science. Seurat was influenced by the science of color and optics. He painted with small dots of intense colors laid side by side in a style called pointillism. The Poor. This is Dorothea Lange, Migrant Mother, Nipomo Valley, 1936. Art provides a record of the poor, their way of life, and their struggles. Art itself, however, is a luxury, so in some cases, artworks represent how the more affluent classes saw the destitute. In Migrant Mother in Nipomo Valley, it's one of the many workers who were starving at a migrant camp. The women's faces and pose express both strength and desperation. Her skin, clothes, and hair show signs of poverty. Fear and uncertainty permeate the scene. We see the emotional ties of the family and the fear of the children. This is one of the most famous images of the Great Depression. Art objects that indicate class status. Different kinds of art are often indicators of class. Art objects are made for and reflect the needs and taste of specific classes. So this is the Uji Bridge Momoyama period, 16th to 17th century in Japan. Historically, in Japan, classes were kept rigidly distinct. The ruling class, and the imperial family and the warriors, and then the very poorest were the peasants. A middle class of urban dwellers began to emerge in the mid-1600s. They each developed their own cultural spheres and art styles. The warrior rulers commissioned large screens, sliding doors, and wall paintings to lighten and decorate the dark interiors. The Uji Bridge is an example of one of these screens. Ukiyo prints were modest in size and produced in large numbers. The cost was within the reach of the middle class. The ukiyo-e prints were eclectic in style, combining Japanese, Chinese, and later Western style. The prints showed generally one of three subjects: kabuki actors, beautiful young women, and landscapes. This is Kitagawa Utamara Komurasaki of the Tamaya Tea House, Japan, 1794. Multicolor woodblock print from the series A Collection of Reigning Beauties. That's so cool. Color woodblock prints were a favored art form of the Japanese merchant class. This is a ukiyo-e period print. The Watts Tower was made by a working class man for a working class neighborhood in Los Angeles. Simon Rodia labored for more than 30 years to erect a 9-part sculpture more than 100 feet high. Rodia was not academically trained as an artist, and his work did not reflect the major art trends of his day. 1921 to 1954. Where was this? I would have loved to see that in Watts, I guess. His work was not made for an upper-class audience. As a result, many critics place Watts Towers in categories outside of fine art. These towers were built by a working-class man in his spare time over a span of 33 years. It has been variously described as folk art, outsider art, or naive art. And that's it. That's the end. All right, guys, thanks so much for this opportunity to teach you this summer. Have a great rest of your summer. Bye.